Hello, so we are heading to China today. The culture is slightly different than all the rest of the other cultures in terms of like its content and what the myths have in them and the symbols, but the main morals and stories kind of remain the same. So let's head in. So China itself is the largest country in the world and it's somewhat isolated. It borders the Pacific Ocean on its east, and that basically sets it apart from any countries on the eastern side. So the country has nearly 3.7 million square miles, and just that's a lot for a country. So let's specifically look at the Eastern China region, where they have stories about nature, and the nature shares a common theme with the contents of the story. So, all right, let's start with the landscape. The landscape is very, very diverse, since it's not just one type. For example, there are mountains, dry plains, deserts, oceans, everywhere. There's just lakes and prairie type of regions, and it's just so variegated that there's you can live anywhere within any of those regions, and it'll be amazing. So, as for the attitude of the Chinese people, they are very respectful for their elders, and they just basically worship them and honor them in high positions. They consider them as like a close form of God. So this is known as filial piety. And so they honor their ancestors in many ways, but they always, always remember them. As for their daily lives, they respect their household very dearly. So people believe that each house has its own God, and I'll explain more about that as we go on, and I will talk about the kitchen god as well. The culture relies on the natural world very, very dearly, just like the Celts and Africans, if you can remember. They believe that higher powers control the world. For example, the goddess Ba serves as a form of drought. Opposite to her is Gong Gong, who causes disastrous floods. This is just an example of their belief in nature because, like, they have so many varieties of gods. Like, there's a sky god, a moon goddess, a star goddess, river god, and so on. So, one important aspect of their culture is their ancient beliefs. I'm sure you've heard of Yin and Yang from books, movies, shows. They just show it very often because it's very, very symbolic in terms of meanings. It's common and it represents a balance of opposing energies of the universe, such as light and dark, heat and cold, hard and soft, dry and wet, masculine and feminine. So I just love the entire concept, and it represents so many different opposites, which means that there is a balance to everything, and the symbol is just a representation of it. On to the three main religious beliefs. There's Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. So Confucians give detailed rules of respect, generosity, honor, family bonds, society, and worship of ancestors. They are actually pretty strict in terms of their teachings, and they hold discipline in very high regard. So this person is a prominent member of the group and belief. In Taoism, the general belief is that Tao is an all-powerful force that exists among nature, teaches people that to live in harmony with nature and have a simple lifestyle without anger is their goal in life. They also believe that people can attain immortality. So these guys are much more similar to other cultural beliefs than the rest, and since nature is one of their most important parts. And this area is actually Mount Laojun, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in the Henan province, and it's a sacred site for Taoists. I mean, the environment, the area location is just so pretty, so you'll find no problem in finding a nice place to live. So, one of the more spiritually inclined religious beliefs is Buddhism. Buddhists believe that life is full of human suffering, which is a result of our desires in life. These desires can continue to our next birth, causing a whole cycle of human suffering through birth and death. I find this fascinating because it shows that life isn't, exactly like a joyride. It's more of a disguised journey that just brings pain. And once a human realizes this, the cycle can be broken by following the path of compassion that is laid out by Buddha. Buddhism didn't originate in China, actually. It was just an idea that spread from the Indian ideas, and then it spread over to China. So now that we've gone through the three beliefs, let's dig deeper and learn about the views of the afterlife. So Confucians focus on earthly life and what we make of ourselves in terms of virtue and moral perfection. Followers don't entirely dismiss the existence of an afterlife. Some Taoists believe that life did not exist after death. However, some Buddhists introduce the idea of reincarnation, so that's just different from the rest, and they brought a new, they introduced a new idea to this entire system. Alright, so reincarnation correlates with the belief of karma. Karma is the retribution applied to a person for their past actions. And samsara is the Buddhist cycle of existence, which is birth, death, and rebirth, and suffering that one experiences in life within that specific cycle. The actions that a person commits in his present life determines the form that the person becomes in their rebirth. So when one reaches enlightenment, aka nirvana, he can escape this dreaded cycle. And this infinity loop basically shows that it's just a never-ending cycle of from child to death and then so on. Alright, so let's look more into the people and specifically the most important figure in Buddhism, who is Shakyamuni Buddha. His name, Buddha, means the enlightened one, and he basically brought the Eightfold Path to the people of India and China. Through his techniques of renunciation, material detachment, and inner balance, he basically teaches his followers the path to nirvana, or eternal peace, happiness, and freedom for the soul from the cycle of rebirth. Some Buddhists have been called bodhisattvas, who are essentially enlightened souls who have been chosen to return to earth and help people. And so here's a touching story about him, actually. He was just born as a prince named Siddhartha Gautam. He grew up in luxury and wealth, and he didn't exactly experience any pain or discomfort since he lived in a high area, and no one really died that he knew, so he didn't understand the entire concept. One day, his personal charioteer took him to see the city after many, many years. Along the way, Siddhartha saw a man suffering a disease. So the man suffering from pains of old age, and he also saw a deceased man being taken to the funeral pyre. And he was just distraught by all these scenes, and he felt that life has no meaning because of aging and death, and just he thought there was more to life than this entire process. So one day he saw an enlightened monk sitting under the tree, free from all pains and sufferings of the world. Siddhartha then decided to renounce the material world and his family to become a monk. He took on these sacred saffron-colored clothes and became a renunciate. He practiced the Eightfold Path and the principles of nonviolence. And one day, under a banyan tree, he attained nirvana, or the transcendental state beyond the cycle of karma, life, death, and rebirth. He then became known as Gautam Buddha. He then taught thousands of followers who spread his teachings far and wide, which eventually became known as the fundamental Buddhist doctrines. So, actually, a side note, a few years ago, I went to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, and I saw this Buddhist come into the section with all these, like for the Buddhism section, and there was a huge statue of him. So the monk's family came with him, and he also had little children. All of them were sitting there, and they basically started to worship all the statues. And I don't know, I just found it very interesting how they came there and worshipped him and his statue in a museum. It's pretty cool. So next is the Jade Emperor. He's basically like the ruler of heaven, and he has ultimate power and governs heaven similar to how an emperor governs China. So that's how they got their ideas. And the emperor is surrounded by lower gods and deceased emperors who act as his like bureaucracy and his advisors. Next up is Ji-Nu, who is a goddess of weaving, spinning, and crafts. So she spun the heavens clouds into beautiful, seamless robes for her father, who was actually the Jade Emperor. She spent her time weaving clothes for him, and with all her hard work, her father gave her permission to go down to Earth. While on Earth, Jinu fell deeply in love with a regular cowherd, Niu Lang. So the Jade Emperor allowed this marriage since his daughter worked so hard in her weaving. However, when she returned, she spent more and more time with her husband than she did making clothes for her father. So he got jealous and basically, out of his anger, he just separated them by placing them at opposite ends of the Milky Way. And now she rests as Vega in the constellation Lyra, and the guy sits at Altair in the constellation Aquila. They get to see each other once a year on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month. So Nugua is one of the creator goddesses in one of their various stories. Nugua is imagined with the head of a female and then the body of a serpent. She came down to earth from the heavens after nature is created. Then she grew the human race out of mud. When she became lonely on earth, she decided to sculpt a human out of mud. She actually liked the first sculpture, and so she decided to sculpt more figures. They came to life, and she left them to populate the world. She taught them how to reproduce, and thus the world was created. So another myth credits Pangu as being the primal deity who created the world. Pangu was born from the two forces of the universe, Yin and Yang, and as you can see, the symbol is in his hand. So he came into being within the darkness of the primordial egg. And once he came to being, he grew for the next 18,000 years, and which eventually broke the egg. So the light and clear parts formed the heavens, which then floated upwards, and meanwhile the earth was formed from the heavy and opaque parts upon them sinking. Pangu stood up and continued to grow, as he prevented the two halves from coming together ever again. It was another 18,000-year-long growing period, during which he grew 10 feet per day. Once the halves solidified, Pangu laid down and died. After his death, his breath became the wind and clouds, while his voice turned to thunder. The sun and moon were formed for his left and right eye, respectively. The stars were formed for his whiskers and his hair. Meanwhile, his remaining body parts formed the earth, including the rivers, the plants, trees, mountains, and every other earthly thing. And finally, his sweat would give us dew and rain. So we're almost close to the end. Just hang on there. So the kitchen god is an individual household deity that was known as the most important deity in the house, actually. There are different gods for different doorways and windows, but he was the most important. His job was to go to heaven and give a report of the family's behavior and discipline. Each year, on the 23rd day of the 12th month, many families would cover his image with sweet paste, so he would be unable to make his report. The story shows how unique and diverse his culture is. Finally, the 8 Immortals are an important group of 8 individuals who achieved immortality according to Taoists, who believed in reaching perfect harmony with the Tao or Tao, either pronunciation works for them actually. The Taoists sought to understand and reach harmony with the Tao, just as the 8 Immortals had done. Each of the Immortals achieved immortality in their own unique way. However, they typically learned an important lesson which came from their own solo adventures and even from the help of another immortal. Alright, that was fairly long. So by now I'm assuming that you can tell that there's so many similarities between the different cultures. And each of them have something to add to the whole of the entire world. Also, side note, if you want to learn more about the culture in an entertaining way, of course, I suggest you watch the cartoon Avatar: The Last Airbender. I assure you that you will love this show from the first episode, and it just explains the concepts that I just talked about in such a way that it's just so fun to watch, and it's very symbolic behind all the entertainment. Like you learn about yin and yang, the balance, the forces of nature, elements. It's all included in this, and it's actually such a great show. So, anyways, I will see you next time on our last journey to the Native American culture. Thank you.